Okay.
All right. Thank you, Laser. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Governance and Policy Committee. This is our first meeting for the 2021-2022 school year. We are going to get this meeting started now officially at 6:10 p.m. Go ahead and make a note of that quickly. All right. The first item of business is we need to select a committee chair. I have chaired the committee last year, and we had decided as a board to have the previous chairperson just kick off the first meeting of the committee just to kind of keep things moving along. So let's go ahead and do the selection of committee chair. If no one's opposed, I'd like to nominate a fellow trustee of mine. I'd like to nominate Trustee Vallon as committee chair. Any
I'll second that nomination.
Trustee Vallon, would you be so gracious to be the chairperson for this committee?
Yes, with your help, I can go with training wheels.
Beautiful. All right. Awesome. So we have a new chairperson. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the help. The next step is selection of recording secretary. Tracy, would you want me to do that?
It's totally up to you. I know you're chairing two other committees, so you let me know.
Okay, so why don't I let me volunteer for that, because you got a bunch of stuff to play too. So I'll go ahead. I'm assuming no one else wants to volunteer, right? Okay, no problem. So we will make me the secretary, which is perfect because I'm already typing. And then we'll move on to the next order of business. So committee charges. Trustee Vallon is now the committee chair. As she said, she would like a little assistance, getting her experience together and getting into a comfort zone. So what we are going to do for this first meeting is I'll lead the entire meeting. And then as Trustee Vallon gets more comfortable and she's ready to take it on, I will totally happily pass on the baton, and then she will take over from there. So that said, let's start talking about committee charges. So last year, the Governance and Policy Committee, it was the first year, if I remember correctly, that we had combined the two committees together. And as a result, we had started working on refining our committee charge. We already had an established governance committee charge, which is actually what's being shown on the screen right now. That has been previously approved by the Board of Education, so there's nothing new there. I'm going to review what the charge is for that committee, and then we'll talk about the policy piece, which we had started talking about last year. Since it was new, we were trying to combine it with the governance committee piece and figure out which charges made sense, or if we wanted to condense it or how we wanted to handle that. And then we got busy with other stuff and it never actually got done. So it would be great if we can establish that from the outright this year and set off on the right foot. So let me go ahead and review the governance committee charge piece that's already approved previously by the board. The function of the governance committee shall be to collaborate with administration and make recommendations to the full school board on the following matters. Recommend new governance policies and amendments to existing governance policies to the board for input and approval. Recommend to the board professional development necessary to assure the board governs at the highest level possible. Conduct an annual self-assessment of the board and report back to the members with recommendations, and discuss with the superintendent her views of the board's performance and ways to strengthen both its governing and supporting role. With that piece, there is one modification I would like to make to the charges if everyone's amenable to it. So that first bullet point, it says recommend new governance policies. I think we had this as a little bit of a conversation last year, whether the Governance and Policy Committee should be reviewing all policies or just the governance of the board specific set of sub-policies. I am in favor of us reviewing all policies where permissible in terms of timing, and obviously there's a lot to be done. I think the charge should be modified to reflect that, but I am seeking input from the committee.
Well, my question is what you're saying not covered below under the policy committee charge, the first bullet point there, where we're overseeing the review of policies?
It is and it's not. So what I think for practical purposes, what I was going to try to do is get us all on the same page with the governance piece, and then just pick one or two bullet points, if appropriate, from the policy piece and fold it in, and then we're done. Just because I think it's way too wordy if we use all the bullet points.
Yeah.
But that's my initial gut. So if we're good with making that change here, maybe we don't need that bullet point from below.
Well, I would recommend substituting the one below for the one that's here, because it does specify that it has to be in accordance with the various mandates.
Okay. Trustee Mayers, I saw your hand.
Yes, I was going to ask if you're referencing the fact that at one point we talked about farming the policies out to other committees. You're saying we shouldn't be doing that.
So what I was going to say is, and that's actually a bullet point later on in the agenda, so I'll touch on it real lightly and then we'll cover it in depth there. My initial gut reaction is, I think it helps to have this committee look at all the policies without necessarily going through the fine details and, ironing them out. Maybe we could serve as a point of, at least let's make sure that we're reviewing the policy, and if we see something that we think needs updating, perhaps maybe then refer those to those committees. If it's a technology related policy, send it to safety and technology and ask that committee to really, really look at it and really figure out, because each one of those committees have their respective SMEs and the appropriate liaisons with them that could really provide that valuable input versus us. I'm sure we could put a lot of stuff together, but we'll never have the full scope, I think, in detail as well, that the individual committees may have. So that was my thought process, but we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get down to that section. But that's the overarching idea in my mind when I say that. But back to Trustee Valens' point, maybe we can combine the two original points, and maybe what we could do is the only piece I think that's missing on the bottom one is the fact that the policies have to be sent back to the board. Mm-hmm. Our school board, right? So we could probably take that piece and just collapse it.
And also include recommending new policies in addition to review of existing policies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so got it. Recommend new policies. So we could just take out this. Oops, too much. We could take out this word and take out existing governance again.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, right? And then we can take this one, cut that, and put it here. Okay, okay, and then a New York State School Board Association, and refer.
Sorry.
And approval. What does the committee think of that first one now?
Can we combine the first one out? Recommend new policies and oversee the review of policies adopted. Wait, I somehow want to combine those two. So, the review of policies to ensure they are in accordance with the rule and approval.
So do you mean recommend new policies and oversee the review of existing policies adopted by the school board and ensure they are in accordance with?
Yes.
It's just a long sentence.
Oversee the creation of and review of policies. And then that way we can get rid of the second bullet point that you have there.
I'm fine with that. Trustee Mayers? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then we can just
delete that.
Okay. All right. The other ones, I think we were all on the same page with the other ones there, right?
Yes, but I do have a question. First of all, the bullet point 2, let's get rid of that comma. Bullet point 3, the comma you have to recommend to the board.
Recommend to the board.
No comma. And bullet point 3, are you saying then, I don't think it's the purview of the committee only uniquely to conduct the annual self-assessment. I thought that was something that each board member participates in.
That's true. I think my suspicion when this charge was written was to ensure that it gets done. So we should probably change the wording. And we can maybe, change it something along the lines of ensure an annual self-assessment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I think it was probably also the full board because at one point we got rid of the committee, right? Wasn't the full board the governance committee? Or was that the policy committee?
That was the policy committee, yeah.
Okay. Although this does make me question, and maybe we can talk about it later in the agenda, do we want to do a mid-year assessment from this smaller committee on how we're doing, what we need to clean up or not do? The bullet point right above that talks about professional development. I'm assuming, retreats, or if there's anything, for example, we've been looking at roles and, board member roles, what's administrative roles, what's not our role. Do we want to kind of do a mid-year assessment on how that's going, how certain things are kind of functioning on the board, or do we just want to do a once a year at the end of the year?
I think if you ask me my opinion, I would probably put that on the new business. And then we can have a little bit of a conversation under that section. So let me just throw that in there real quick so we don't forget. So mid-year board evaluation. I'll put a question mark and then we'll come back to that. Okay, perfect. All right, so moving right along. So we're good with the governance piece. So what's left in the policy? Let's see if there's anything else we want to move. Establish priorities and policy review and adoption and consultation with the superintendent and the administration. I think that's kind of covered by our first one. So I think it's redundant. So unless there's any strong opinion, we'll go ahead and remove that one. All right. Set goals and annual schedules for policy review and adoption of board bylaws, internal operations, community relations, administration. That's a good one. And I don't see that covered. So I think we should include that. Is anyone opposed?
No, I'm curious though, are we going to maintain two separate identifiers for governance and policy, or can these all be rolled into?
My goal is as we go through the policy piece, I'm going to keep folding them up and then I'm going to change it from governance and policy once we're done with all this.
Because this bullet point to me speaks more to possibly governance than policy, frankly. For talking about setting schedules for adoption of various business items.
Yeah, but it's also talking about policy review. So I think that's where I thought it was policy. But like I said, we could just, if we're good with that point, we can just fold it in because ultimately it's a combined committee now. So, okay, the next one, review recommended board action on policies not specifically in the purview of another school board committee. So this gets to what we were talking about earlier, which is, does the governance and policy committee take on the role of only looking specifically at the policies that are not being covered by another committee in depth? Or do we take on the role of going through all policies on some level in depth? Or do we take the option of let's just make sure that the policies are being reviewed on some annual basis and then sending them to committee where possible? Trustee Vallon, I see your hand.
So in my opinion, the charges are more what we're going to do, not how we're going to do it. And this bullet point for me is a how. It's how we're going to distribute the work. So I don't even know if this needs to be in the charges. And therefore, I think this is covered by the very first point up top. Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
I think it go either way, but I'm not opposed to removing it. To your point, I think it is covered in the previous points. And I don't want the charge to get overwhelmingly large.
Right.
Just for clarity, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the policy committee charge, that the bullet points I was showing was something I had actually found online from another policy committee in I don't even think it was a school board, or it may have been a school board. It might have been a governing governing body of some organization, and we kind of just cobbled that together and said, okay, let's start with this as a starting point. So yeah, in this case, I don't think this necessarily has to be specifically called out, because we can address that. Any opposition with removing it? No? Okay. All right, and then the last one that was separately called out was evaluate suggestions for school board policy and recommend development of policies for adoption. I think that's covered already in the other ones, so we can just move that if no one has an opposition. And then now we have our combined, and we will call it policy charges.
Yeah.
Do we have a recommendation from the committee to move this to the board for approval?
So moved.
A second.
Okay, aye. So we will make this a recommendation.
Okay, Trustee Pineda, can I just suggest that you do send this or a request for this to be approved tonight after the meeting, just so that we're within the 5-day recommendation to get it onto our November 2nd meeting.
Will do.
Do it within 5 days to request it.
Got it. Will do. Okay. All right. Moving right along. Thank you for indulging us in that exercise, community. Now we have our formal committee charters. All right. Next thing, board retreat. So the next thing for board retreat, we had 2 retreats already, if I remember correctly, this school year so far. During our last retreat, we did have a conversation where it arose that maybe we should have another retreat specifically talking about protocols and communication and ensure that everyone's on the same page so that everything is as efficient as possible, right? With all the work going on, as much as we can be efficient, it'll be better for all of us. So I put a bullet point here on this one just so that we wouldn't forget about that. And also, I think it would be a good idea if we start talking with the entire BOE on dates so that we can get that in the calendar, because as we all know, our calendars get pretty full pretty quickly. Does anybody have any ballpark idea of dates? Like, would we want to try to do this? I would love to do this sometime November, December latest, but I know holidays are coming and it gets crazy.
I have to admit my availability in November is nearly gone. So I would prefer December, January.
I would prefer December, but what date is the question? I'm looking on the calendar, the printed calendar. We have SAT date, ACT test date, Woodlands Middle High School pick up fruit.
Well, maybe we should consider what we'll cover and how much time we would need so that we can consider whether it's definitely a weekend or a longer 3-hour weeknight.
Sorry, yes, that's a good idea.
Just food for thought.
So along those lines, I think to not make it too long, since we're considering the fact that, you know, these months are getting crazy with holidays and all the stuff that's going on in personal lives, if we can probably stick to just protocols and communication only for that meeting, I think it wouldn't have to be, you know, a 3-hour, 4-hour kind of ordeal at that point. We could probably get that done in less than 2 hours. And if that's the case, I think the board might be more amenable to trying to squeeze that in sometime in December.
Okay, I mean, I personally like the at least 3 hours. I think if we, I don't know if we're going to utilize a facilitator or not. I don't know if we're going to do specific examples or not, but you know, all of us get to talking. So I'm a little afraid to plan a 2-hour thing.
Yeah, I think if we go beyond 2 hours, it's going to need to be a weekend thing. And that's where I think it'll get a little crazy on the scheduling side. I think if we kept it to 2 hours or below, it would probably be easy to get the team. Even if we ended up having to do like, like an evening at the high school or something like that, that might be easier to pull off. That's my gut. So I would say, at least it sounds like from this conversation, are we at least in alignment on the content, that the content would be protocols and communication? Okay, so then let's call that at least out. So content will be protocols and communication.
Dr. Is there anything else Dr. Iverson would like to include?
No, I think that's where we ended. I think we should finish with that, especially as Dr. Coles was about to get into the protocols. So I think we finish up that work first and then see how far we get, and I get back, to some more discussion around the goals that we began. I just think we continue along that trend and get that finished first.
So that's another piece that we didn't get to finish, which makes me again go toward a 3 to 4 hour type of retreat, is that we will need to do communication protocol, and we really haven't made any movement on our goals. We had a wonderful presentation by Dr. Iverson. It was really awesome. And we just started hearing about the compiled information, but we didn't really get into beginning the work on our board goals.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the one question that brings up in my mind is, Dr. Iverson, I know you need some additional time to compile the input from the rest of the sessions. Do you think that a December timeline would be appropriate for you to have had that already?
Thank you for that, because I was hoping to have it November, and I don't. I need December because I'm scheduling some time with students and working out a way to do that. And it would help if I could have their voices as well. And then I have some other schedules. I just need December would be fair, much more time for me. I appreciate it if you could allow me that time to finish up and then get to the board, and maybe we can plan in that December meeting. That's where I'll be able to present the comprehensive data around all of this that I said I would have.
Okay, perfect. That sounds like the stars are aligning. Thank you for that feedback. All right, so that's what we'll plan. It'll be content will be protocols and communications, as well as continuing, I guess we'll call it district goals.
Mm-hmm.
I think these are the board goals, no?
Yes.
Specifically the board goals.
Is there discussion about the difference? I was hoping we did that with Dr. Coles, because the district goals and board goals and my goals, there are 3 buckets of goals that are overlapping. I think we need to streamline this a little bit, and that's the next piece of the work we do together to see that alignment, because technically the goals the board has specifically to you and your governance is one thing, but the board also sets goals for the district that my responsibility is to do and to implement. And so I have to make so that's the alignment with your goals and mine. And so we don't have a reproduction of work, we probably need to look at all 3 and streamline it to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you agree with that or not. I mean, otherwise we have your goals, my goals, and we have district goals.
If our goals aren't all aligned, I don't think we're going anywhere. So I think it makes sense to streamline them.
Yeah, I know in the past the goals were the same headings, the same buckets.
Yep.
So we do need to have it, more discussed in that way. So it may have to be a longer. How do you guys feel about a longer retreat, as far as like 3-4 hours as opposed to a 2-hour retreat?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not raising my hand. I apologize. So if it's easier, I'm curious if the board would be, so we would have this meeting to hear what Dr. Iverson has gathered from the other constituencies that you've been speaking to, but I also know we recently approved the hiring of someone to help us with this task. And I don't know if that would be yet another meeting on goals. I also don't want to.
Yeah, because that's a good point, because he is taking, this is the part of that phase 1 In fact, probably this whole discussion around goals is maybe a little early. When it was requested that I get my goals to you, I was just thinking along the lines that I don't know how early I know what they are based on what I was doing, trying to collect data around where to begin to focus the work, which would become the goals that I would work on, that the board would also be aligned with, and they become our district focus for our strategic plan. So yeah, the answer to that is, you're right. I think when he gets here and we start working on the strategic piece of this, fleshing out, like I said, the objectives, the specific activities, the timelines, how we're going to measure the short term, the long term, which ones we're going to go to, that depth of work with the committees, that's when he will take what we have done here and lead the work into fleshing it out. But in his proposal, there was some talk about once he gets with the committees, some of this could shift once they weigh in around where some of these areas should be. So I'm not answering the question. I guess I'm saying to you, a lot of this is maybe a little premature. What I'm doing feeds into what he will pick up and do. And from there is where we get the areas, the goals, and where we need to focus. But it's nothing wrong in doing this now and then making sure when it aligns when we get into the deeper work, because we can always make adjustments. It's not carved in stone. This is the beginning of the discussion with board members talking to each other and identifying your areas of where you would like to focus, and now let the community weigh in through this process to see if they align with your thoughts. And so it's nothing wrong with adjusting, I think, at that point, if that makes sense.
It does. Can I make a suggestion though? It sounds like from what you just described, it sounds to me like maybe the more practical thing to do during that board retreat meeting would be continue with the protocols and communications, and then Dr. Iverson, have you do your presentation to the board on what you've, aggregated at that point with all the feedback and all that, and maybe stop there.
Yeah.
And then pick up the next piece with the facilitator, and then we're giving him the data that will help drive those decision points, and then we'll go through the process. That sounds to me like that's where we should be going, but I'm looking for feedback.
That sounds perfect. So are we looking at 3 hours again, a 2-hour communication protocol and a 1-hour presentation like Dr. I did last time?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me.
Yeah, I would say minimum 3. Mm-hmm.
Now we need to know if Saturday morning was feasible for everyone or not.
Well, we could also, if we're talking 3 hours, that's sometimes shorter than a board meeting. I think we could also consider weeknights. Sorry. So I don't want to limit it to just weekends unless everyone else on the committee opposes that.
So here's what I would suggest. Now that we have our content areas and we have the potential duration, I would suggest that our next step be to reach out to the board and say, hey, we're targeting December preliminarily as the next board retreat. This is our focus area. We think it'll take about this long, and get a feeler for scheduling. And, we can give options for Saturdays, and we can get options for weeknights and see where we all land. Because with the 7 of us plus Dr. Iverson's calendar, we all have calendars full, and maybe we'll get lucky and find one date that aligns. That's what I would make a suggestion as to actually the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to pick 3 or 4 dates to present to the board for consideration, or just do that all at once?
I would do it all at once personally, because I know I'm looking at December right now. Obviously, nothing's happening the week of December 20th. I doubt anyone will have free time around then. And then the week after that usually is a kind of a bye week as well, right? With the holidays there. So we're really talking about really just the 1st through the 18th, really.
We do have a board meeting on the 21st. Let's see.
Do we?
My calendar is pretty free,
Yeah, we do.
so whatever the board decides, I can just block that out. Weekends or after work is fine.
Okay.
Are all of the, I'm looking at the online calendar, so it looks like we have some committee meetings in here already. So our work session is the 7th, our regular meetings are 21st. Special vote is the 14th. We could meet on the 14th, even though we're having a special vote that night.
Well, the 14th is variable because we're still debating on the Safety and Technology Committee. If we're doing that the 14th or the 15th, that's come back.
It's on the 15th right now, so that's why I thought,
It's at the wrong time if it stays on the 15th. That's another conversation.
okay. So,
Do we do something the first week of December so that we don't kill everybody with back to back to back, or the second week?
Just so you know, there's a tentative December 2nd date for the FinFac committee. Sorry, I'm looking at that email.
Okay,
That's
so
not gonna that won't be approved till tomorrow. So, if it is approved.
let me check the yearly calendar to see if there's anything going on in the schools at that time.
What date are we looking at? Sorry.
so we could do, it looks like 8, 9.
So the 8th has the Woodlands Middle School winter concert. I know last year they did they did concerts virtually. So I don't know if that would be, if that happens.
And you'll have a meeting on Thursday, Tracy, if they have that rising
Yes.
junior.
Mhm.
What about what about the 29th, the Monday after parent teacher conferences, ECP early dismissal? The 29th, the 30th?
The 29th of November.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can do that night. I won't be free till 7:30. The 30th, I'm free.
The 29th, I'll be out of town.
Oh, you'll be out of town?
I'll be back on the 30th.
Is the 30th too soon from you getting back from out of town?
Not for me, but we need to account for Dr. Iverson needs that time. I don't know if that's enough time.
Yeah, I do need that time. I would like that. Because don't forget, we have in November, that time from Thanksgiving is just a couple of days, but there is a vacation in November. So it would help.
So here's my suggestion. Why don't we start with December 11th as the target?
Yeah.
Saturday, and let's see how everyone feels about it.
Okay.
Because it looks like the weekdays, as predicted, are getting crazy already.
Did we say December 11th and 4th? The 18th might be a little too close to the, although we have our meeting on the 21st. So should we just say the 4th might be too soon, but the 11th or 18th?
I'm fine with 11 and 18.
That's fine with
The
me.
13th is PTA council. I don't know if the PTA councils are still meeting on these dates, though.
So 11 and 18. 18, does that work for you, Trustee Ballin?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Last time we did 10 to 1. Is that the time? Do we like that, or do we want to do 9 to 12? You know, I'm an early bird, so I always err on early. Do we want to do 11 to 2? You know, how do people schedule?
Not 11 to 2, 9 to 12 or 10 to 1 is my vote.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put them both out there. Let's put both options out and see what the board comes back with. I mean, there's 7 of us, so. All right, so we have a tentative time and date, and we will refer that to the BOE and see where we go. All right, awesome. Thank you. Let's move along to board evaluation.
I'm sorry to stop you, Mr. Pineda. Can we talk about if we're having Dr. Coles do the retreat again? Is he continuing on with where we left off and discussing specifics of communication and protocol only?
Sure.
Okay.
I have my initial gut would be yes. It makes sense to me. He's already gone through it with us. We already have that relationship established. He already knows where we left off. I think it would be most efficient to continue with him. Plus, the cost is amazing, free. So that would be my vote. I don't know if anyone feels differently.
Well, I have a question for Dr. Iverson. If that's the part of our last retreat that we left off, was he going to lead that conversation, or were you going to lead that part of that conversation. I don't really know what the plan was.
No, it's his plan. In his PowerPoint, you notice in the back, he has some hypotheticals. And what was going to be great about it, if we had time, was to engage in conversation at that point to develop protocols, you and I together, around how this should look. So he was going to kind of lead that work, facilitate it. So I'm there to talk from a superintendent perspective. You're there from a board perspective, and he can then, kind of guide what the protocols look like from his experience. And so it was part of his work. Yes.
Should we check to see if he's available on those 2 dates before we present it to the board next week?
That's a great idea.
I'm drafting an email.
Thank you for pointing that out. All right, so we're going to say Dr. All right. All right, let's move forward. Board evaluation. So during our last committee cycle for the Governance and Policy Committee, one of the members had made a suggestion and inquired if we should consider a meeting evaluation tool to be had post meetings. And the idea there was to try to evaluate from each board member's perspective, how the meeting went and areas for potential improvement. The tool that was suggested was very verbose. And we as a group decided that it was too lengthy to kind of consider to do that every single meeting. So what we had done was taken that tool, shared it out with that existing board at the time, and said, hey, please slice and dice this as you see fit and pull out anything of value you feel that would be useful, if anything, and reply back. And that really never went anywhere. Of course, during that time, the board, there was a bit of turmoil going on. We weren't being as efficient as we could be. So it may be a moot point, but at the same time, in my thought process, I always think of it's not just what's happening today, it's what can happen in the future with future boards and the dynamics that happen there. So, I thought it would be a worthwhile idea to at least have the conversation again and figure out if we want to, restart that effort, if we think we shouldn't. Open to ideas, open to different tools, and looking for feedback. Trustee Valen.
Okay, without having seen the tool, although I probably viewed it on a meeting last year briefly, my immediate thought is consistency is my theme. I feel like we shouldn't look to those kind of tools only in times of turmoil. I think we should be using those kind of things consistently, in the good, the bad, because we should always be striving to improve the way we do things. My only caveat is I would hope for a tool that is incredibly streamlined, that would take 1 minute to fill out, and whether it's just anonymously giving maybe to our committee for review to sift through for possible improvements to meeting protocols and procedures, or to the board president, that's a discussion. But I think it's something we should consider, and I'd be interested in seeing what was considered last year.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm kind of for it. I was a part of the group that wasn't functioning very well, and when we needed this, I'm not sure that this group needs it as much, but I do know, as Chris said, we do have 3 new trustees. It would be good for all of us to look at what did and did not transpire in the meeting, how much work we did or did not get done, looking at time frames. Are there places where we could be more efficient? So it can't hurt. I'll put it that way. I think it would be a good thing to leave.
Okay. All right. Dr. Iverson, any feedback, or are you good? Or
I agree with that. It doesn't hurt. I think that's a good approach. This is a new year, as another way to kind of begin again. And I think it's important for all of us to evaluate our work. And so I agree with the approach that was discussed.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Iverson. All right. So the next steps on this one, let's just, for baseline, what I will do is I will circulate what we sent around last year. I'm telling you right now, it is long, which is why we started the conversation with, okay, this isn't going to work and we have to cut this down. Trustee Valen, point taken on the fact that it has to be streamlined, because that was part of the conversation last year was, if it's taking us 10 minutes to fill this out, then no one's going to fill it out and it loses its purpose, right? So I'll circulate what we circulated last year. We absolutely have to slice it and dice it because it's way too long. But we can pull from that, extract what we feel is useful. And if we feel there's nothing useful, at least maybe that will give us inspiration to find another tool. So the next steps is I will get that into our packet.
And as incoming chair, I'll try to dig around for some other samples that we could consider for the next meeting and share those out.
I was going to ask, do we want to, that might look a little daunting to folks. Do we, the three of us and four of us with Dr. Iverson as well, because she's in our meetings and she's very actively in our meetings. So do the four of us want to look at it and try to splice it down, or do we want to send it to everyone? Because that might be a little overwhelming.
I'm fine either approach.
I'm fine with either approach, but I want to lean towards us coming up with a better first draft for the board to review.
Okay.
I mean, isn't that we're trying to do the work in the committees before presenting to the board and recommending to the board for their input. So I feel like we should take that first rough cut.
They might get turned off if they see it and say, I don't want to do this after a meeting.
Yeah.
I'm so,
Yeah, I think they're farming out our work to them, so.
Okay, so then I will change my next step and I will get that tool to us this evening through email so that we can just look at it. And then maybe what we'll do is, as part of the next committee meeting, if there's time, maybe schedule some time in there to do some further refining. Okay. The next item, student participation at board meetings. So we have talked about this in the past, but I didn't want to lose sight of that. So I wanted to make sure that we kept talking about it. So one of the, so the board, obviously, based on the conversations we've had at the board table and in our open meetings and all that, we support having student participation at the board meetings. We can't do it yet because we need our community to vote and approve that, right? For there to be a non-voting student board member. So that's in the works. So the first thing is we never settled on, do we want them to only be present at certain meetings? We have to be cognizant of the fact that these are students and they still have their full school coursework, right? So they're doing all that. And then on top of that, we would be inviting potentially maybe someone from the student government to be participant in the board meetings. And as we all know, those board meetings can be very long depending on what's going on. So one of the considerations that was suggested last year when we talked about this was, well, what if we invite them to one of the 2 meetings a month? That way they're not, in there all those hours twice a month, going through all the motions with us. That was one perspective. I think it's a good one. But I wanted feedback and to see if there was a preference or a thought as to which meeting was more beneficial to have the student be a participant.
So I think it would have to be the regular meeting because that's the meeting that we try to keep our exec session to the 1 hour. I mean, all of the exec session would be nice if we can get them under an hour, but with the regular meeting, we start at 7 and pretty much go right into exec session, but we come out at 8. Like everyone knows, we're coming out at 8. We stop exec session if we need to and come out at 8 and handle business. If we were to do it the other way around, how would the student know, the timing? I'm not sure how that would work.
Sure. So we're going to talk about public comments in a few minutes, so maybe that can fold into that. But thank you for that. That's helpful. Trustee Vallon, I see your hand.
So I'm going to go with the opposite because we've moved most of our presentations by district administrators and school administrators to the work sessions. And that I think is probably a lot of meat for the students to chew on and maybe where we want to hear some input or questions from them and where they might get more value out of listening. Now that folds into what Ashley just said. If we consider where we put public comments in exec session and the timing of our meetings, then maybe we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I would also recommend, I know the vote is specifically for a student member of the Board of Education at these meetings, but I also highly recommend that any student who wants to participate attends the CEC meeting. It's a community engagement meeting. And I think that's a perfect place for a student to attend as well.
That's not a bad idea, actually. I like that.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Dr. Iverson, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. The whole point of having, I think, a student on there is to get their perspective around the work the board is doing. As you're talking and making decisions, you know, that govern and lead the district, it's them weighing in on how it impacts them. So I do think at that work session where the meat of the work is done is where they weigh in around presentations we may make or discussions you have as a board around governance, around what we're talking about. And that seat is for the student to kind of say what it means to them. And so I do think work session is better. I agree, Trustee Mayers and Fallon, if we can look at that time and structure so the youngster can get in and out of there and get out and maybe and leave when we go into exec session, but we definitely want this person to be able to weigh in from that perspective. So I would agree with work session that's just where I think this person should be.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. I would have to agree with that sentiment. It makes sense to me. So let's go ahead and say that as a whole, the committee is recommending the work session.
Can I ask where they would go so they would attend at 7?
So so we'll have to figure that out still.
Okay.
When we get to the next item number 7 and we start talking about our meeting structure, that might help determine for us where they would fit in and
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sure. All right. The last piece on student participation, and I put this here. I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget it. That we confirm that it's already on the December ballot, requesting the voter approval for a student board member.
Yes, I can, Trustee Harris, if you want to address that first. Because I know Ivy has said to me it's on the ballot. So it's been confirmed that is also that's on the ballot, that and the other item for December.
Perfect. Beautiful. All right. Thank you. All right. So the next thing is an exhaustive, and I mean exhaustive list of policies that were suggested to be reviewed this cycle. The first one, I think we'll spend a little time on tonight, and the rest of them, my suspicion is we'll look at them. Trustee Valen was gracious enough to put together the policy numbers as well as the last time they were reviewed with revision dates. So that helps us see how old some of these policies are. When was the last time they were looked at and reviewed or updated, I should say, not necessarily reviewed, updated. So with that said, I think we'll get through probably the first discussion point, and then maybe depending on time, we should probably then go to new business, discuss what Trustee Mayers raised, get that done, and then maybe come back if there's time or decide we want to start, potentially saying, okay, this policy should go to that committee, et cetera. So let's first look at go ahead, Dr. Iverson.
So the question I have here in the New York School Board Association, which has a section in that policy, and that office is responsible for updating and with the latest legislation, the latest language and decisions made on all of these policies, because these policies here, every district has probably the same numbers. I've learned that the policies that come in school district policy are policies all districts have that come under the governance of the School Board Association. And that office is responsible for those updates. So as you begin policy review, as we select which ones, the first place, and you may have discussed this at the beginning, with having that liaison with the New York School Board Association to get the latest version. They can send this policy with the latest language. Then what happens when we get it? Administration looks at it and look to see what's relative to our district, because you do get an opportunity to make it relative to some of how the regulations look from the policy, how we implement it. But the New York State Board Association will first tell you, these are the changes all the policies must have, that all districts have. And then we make it relative. So my administrative team and I normally will look at them. And then it comes to you. This is for the board to begin to look at, and you have your several times you have to look at it. I don't know if you do 1 or 2 readings here, and you get to then weigh in around from the lens of governance, what else you would like to see there, anything you want me to take back and add to it, questions to me around how as a district we implement whatever that policy may be, if you have questions. And then of course you can add other language, but that process should start with that school board association. So is that part of this review, that you're going to first, let's get the changes there and then build upon that? Because a lot of the changes come from, like I said, the level of legislation and things that are made at the state level that have been decided that all schools must implement. And we begin with that.
Agreed. So just to give you a little historical context for why we're talking about it, it's that historically at GCSD, a lot of times our policy updates, to your point, come from NISBA or EV1 BOCES or some kind of legislation that changes, right? And that kicks off the process. What has happened in our district for a while now is we haven't necessarily gone back and looked at policies unless there was an update from EV1 BOCES or NISBA. For all those other policies that didn't have an update, we haven't been as efficient as ensuring that they're reviewed on a more frequent basis, which is why you'll see some of those last revision dates are a little older. So the goal here, Dr. Iverson, would be to do exactly what you're saying is, let's say we agree on, okay, we want to look at these particular policies. We should definitely start with NISBA and EV1 BOCES to get the latest what they have. Then the next step in our policy review process is that we send it to administration and we have administration review it. We also have a step in there for legal counsel to review any changes. And then once it's gone through that whole process, then it would come to the board and then we would do our review and then the readings and formally adopt. But what we wanted to do here is just make sure that we actually look at some of these policies that haven't been updated in a while because no updates have been needed, and just make sure that, you know, there's nothing there that we feel should be addressed in some kind of way, something that may have changed that we haven't looked at it because it's been all updated and it's just kind of stayed the same.
And also, I think we get involved in a lot of roles that aren't necessarily board level roles. And this kind of keeps us focused on what we're actually here to do, which is focus on the policies, update any policies, but also look and see how this policy does or doesn't work, you know, in the district because of this process. And it has to go through administration. You tell us, you know what, I'm looking at this policy, but if it's not reviewed since what, 2012, this one D is 2012, who knows if we're looking at that every day, you know, we're checking for you guys, but more so I think for the board to keep us focused on what we're supposed to be doing, which is maintaining our policies and making sure that, you know, we're supporting our policies and the work that we do as board members. So I think it'll be helpful. I don't know, Mr. Pineda, if you could remind everyone where this list of policies came from, because this is obviously not every policy we have, but it's a subset of them.
Correct. So these are policies that were aggregated in various conversations, feedback we've had along the years, and just policies also that we feel haven't been touched in a while and that could be relevant to the school district. So that's where this list was aggregated. Trustee Valen did us all a big favor and aggregated the bulk of it. But these are all policies that we have touched on in some shape or form in the past as policies that should be reviewed. And we just haven't done it in a long time because, again, either EV1 BOCES or NISBA hasn't really had an update to it because the policy has been fine. And because of that, we haven't gone through the process.
I can give you a concrete example, student participations at board meetings. So we don't have anything specifically in our public comment section, right, about students. But I was told, and this is now my 5th year on the board, so for the first 4 years on the board, I was told that students can come and speak at board meetings as long as their parents are with them. Okay, so I believe that, and that's how I move forward. Then I've learned that there's actually a policy that was in a totally different area of the policy manual that talked about students could participate with a written letter from their parents with written permission, right? Then, because I had CC Carol on that email looking into the policy, Carol, our legal, came back and said, well, actually, I think students have freedom of speech and can speak at a board meeting, actually can't be prevented in any way, whether they have parent permission or not. So that is something, for example, we need to look at and make sure we have the up-to-date information, but as well as having it in our public comment section, which is where naturally someone would look to find out about public comments from students. They wouldn't look in the other section. I forgot the section off the top of my head that line was written.
Tracy, or I do have the policy 3240 is the one that talks about student participation in public information programs. I'll add that to the list of many things to review. It hasn't been touched since 2012.
And so when we found that, Ivy was wise enough to say, I'm going to put, I think at the bottom of the public participation policy, there's a section that says to cross-reference. So she put in there now, cross-reference 3240, just so that you could know about that particular line. But before then, there was no one that was reviewing that. So hopefully that makes some sense that, we need to stay more relevant on our policies.
Thank you for that additional context. All right, so let's start with the first policy, which is 1510, regular board meetings and rules, quorum and parliamentary procedure. We last revised that on June 1st, 2021. I think at that point we were revising virtual meetings and all that came into play to make sure there was clarity there. But specifically, public comments. So public comments, we've had discussions about public comments, I would say, ever since I've been on the board. We've been talking about public comments and what adjustments we want to make. There have been all sorts of variations to that. There have been no public comments. You cannot change public comments. There has been change the time of public comments, make it longer, make it shorter. It's gone back and forth, right? The best suggestion I have heard thus far is taking the 4 minutes of public comment that we allow now and segmenting those public comments into two separate sections. One section being specifically public comment on agenda items happening towards the beginning of the meeting before executive session. That way the board has the opportunity to hear the public's thoughts on agenda items that will be voted on in the future, that could potentially be discussed in exec session. So that's one consideration, is to take that 4 minute time frame of public comments, split it in half, put 2 minutes on the front of the meeting, specifically around agenda items, and then taking the remaining 2 minutes, putting that closer towards after agenda items have been voted on by the board, and then allowing the second public comment session for anything that needs to be said by any community member. That would be 2 minutes after the agenda has gotten through. That way, we've had the ability, the board has had the ability to hear the public's input on agenda items, but also hear about the public's general input on the school district or anything that's on their mind, while still ensuring that the agenda items are addressed in a timely manner. So that is the best suggestion I've heard thus far. Again, I've heard all sorts of variations. We talked about it at different levels. Obviously looking for input. I see Trustee Valen has her hand up.
So I'm not going to directly comment yet on the split timing. I'm going to look more point A or point I, the meeting structure. Right now, I'm looking at October 5th's work session agenda. We have the call meeting to order, the pledge, statements from the public, And then all of our presentations, the policy reviews, the admin presentation, board report, superintendent report, committee reports. My question is, should the statements from the public come after the presentations in case they had a query on a presentation? Because other things that have come up are, is the public allowed to ask questions during those presentations the way the board is? Again, I'm going to go back to consistency. We need to be consistent. Sometimes we let them, sometimes we don't. I think we need to set a rule. One way to set that rule would be to move the public comments after the presentations so that the opportunity would be there for them to query anything they've just heard. Sorry, I'm throwing a little wrench into
No,
it.
it's fine. I think that's a great point. I think you're right. I think over the years, it's been very different. We've had presentations where, you know, before COVID, when the audience had their hands up, there were a lot of people there, and you're literally calling people from the audience to ask questions. And then we've had presentations where only the board may ask questions. So I'm open to either, actually. I would love to hear Ashley and Dr. Iverson's feedback on that.
Right, I just want to interject one quick thing. The exception here is when we have those official public hearings. There is definitely always an opportunity for public input, I believe, at those public hearings. I don't think that's in writing anywhere, because we open the public hearing and then we close the public hearing. So maybe that's something we also need to put in writing, but that's the one exception to the speaking out of turn.
So my feedback on that, it makes a lot of sense. The only thing is, we do need to consider if we follow that approach. We currently have that rule where you need to sign up to talk as part of public comment. And if we're changing that and shifting it to, okay, the public can ask questions about a presentation, but they're not signed up, then that kind of leads us into a catch-22. So maybe we want to consider changing that just for the agenda section, to open up that flexibility so that if someone's there live and hears something in a presentation, they do have a question, they can just ask it during that public comment section. So that's my only consideration. Dr. Iverson, thoughts?
So that's 4 minutes, correct? And so was the discussion 2 minutes permitted for those who sign up, who want to ask questions about what's on the agenda? And then the 2 minutes allowed for questions on any presentations that are made. Is that, did I understand that's what we said?
So the initial part is correct. It would be 2 minutes for agenda items only, public comments on agenda items only. And then the second part would be 2 minutes on any concern or feedback or any statement from the public about the district as a whole. And that would happen later on in the meeting. Trustee Valen was just saying that maybe instead of having the public comment happen before presentations, that we should throw that after presentations. That way, in case we see a presentation on one of the schools and someone in the audience, a public member, has a question about the presentation, that can be captured during that public comment section.
With the intent to answer those questions there, or to get back to them with responses?
So we usually have a section called like presentations and reports. So I'm thinking back to pre-COVID, public comments always just came first. I mean, it would literally just be a simple culture change as long as we have it on the agenda and it's clear. We have public comments is usually part of the section of the agenda that says opening items. So what happens is, if after opening items, which includes opening the meeting, the pledge, guys, stop fighting, my dog and cat are fighting, I'm sorry. Opening items, the pledge, public comments, then the next section usually says presentations and reports or something like that. And that's when we have, the scheduled presentation. I think we had a technology presentation. We've had a special education presentation. In the past, we've had the individual school buildings, and we're going to do that this year, presentations. So we would, and I can talk to Ivy about it, need to move public comments out of opening items and put it in some other type of section. I mean, I can talk to Ivy about it. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a great idea. I'm just, practically trying to figure out if that's going to be, she could be able to do that.
I think, Dr. Iverson, you were also asking if answers would be required at the time. I'm thinking, but even to our recent meeting with an administrator, the board asked questions. They were able to be answered at the time, but I wouldn't, I'm sure there will be many circumstances where either a board member is asking a question or a public person is asking a question, the answers won't be available, and that could be available for follow-up.
Yeah, so yes, board questions at the time of a presentation definitely aren't responses are provided right then and there, because we're presenting to the community and the board, whatever the topic is. Questions from the audience, from the public, I certainly think are valuable. I'm just trying to get, so are we saying that, we will open it up to the public to have any questions around presentations and we address them there? In the past couple of meetings, public participation, when someone has had questions, we've definitely gotten back to them with responses the very next day. So we don't have the responses there because they may not be even, at that point, they weren't necessarily questions about what was on the agenda, just whatever was on their heart. And we're recording them and we're getting back to them the very next day with responses. And I've gotten good feedback with them. Thank you for turning it around and getting responses back to me. So I want to just continue with that. If they have questions about the presentation that we cannot address, that requires more information, we will continue to follow that. I'm just trying to think about the minute structure you have in place, because it can make our meetings even longer if we, if the questions around presentations, it can just make our meetings even longer. So just trying to get having some structure around what do we address.
I also,
for consistency, because sometime in the past, sometimes questions have been allowed at presentations and sometimes they've been not. So whatever we come up with, I just want it to be consistent.
I agree with you.
Knows. I'm not.
I agree.
Public input, but I'm not 100% that way.
If we were to change the structure, going along with Trustee Pineda's suggestion of having 2 public comment times, the questions about the presentation could be brought up then. Again, they may not get an answer. Whoever's given that presentation may have left already, but at least they get to ask their question. Dr. Iverson will field it to whoever. For example, we already did technology. If there were some technology questions asked at the second public comment section, and they get 2 minutes, Dr. Iverson would field that to the technology director to answer that question back to the person. Yeah, I think that's probably better than having anyone from the public directly ask a question to any of the staff. But I don't know how people feel about that.
So my thought process is if we follow that idea, right, where we did the first public comment session, and that was agenda items or anything that's on the agenda, which would include presentations, right? And let's say the public community members are sitting there in the audience, they didn't get a chance to ask their question, or they didn't have a question at that point in time, but later on during the meeting, it occurs, hey, I do have a question. They can always raise that during the second section, because that is anything that's on your mind, on your heart, right? Talk about it. They could always, to your point, Trustee Maris, just raise it there, and then we can capture it, and we can follow the same procedure we follow today, which is we'll get administration will respond, and they'll get the answer. I think that makes sense to me. Trustee Vallon, I see your hand up.
Yep, it makes total logical sense. However, our current policy states that for work sessions, all public comments need to be agenda related, and they're not, and we don't police it. So while it makes logical sense, we also have to factor in the need for the person chairing the meeting, the board president or her delegate, to police that. Again, if we're going to change the format to be 2 minutes agenda only and 2 minutes later not, we have to be following those rules ourselves. So realistically speaking, I think I'm looking at this work session, all the opening items, call meeting to order, pledge of allegiance, statements from public, policy review, blah, 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 and then exec session. What if we just move statements from the public to just below, after all the presentations and reports, and then public comment, and then adjournment to exec session. You could have people have to sign up before the meeting. I hear what you were saying before, but we could just go in order of who signed up before the meeting, because theoretically they came in knowing what they wanted to say. And then anyone who wants to speak after that, if there are new people who want to speak, we just put the sign up sheet on the podium and sign your name before you speak, with your contact details. And
Yeah, I think that works for this October 5th meeting, but that's actually not funny that you picked this meeting, because usually it doesn't work that way. So usually the pupil personnel services presentation will be in, if you look at the September, no, the 14th didn't have presentation, the 21st meeting. So that it's very clear. There's opening items, and then B is presentation and reports. So I think what happened at the October 5th meeting is, so I'm glad you caught that. We just didn't have A5 as B1. It just should have been B1 as a separate presentation situation. We had it included in the opening items. So I think that's just the difference with those two meetings. But if we look back at some previous meetings where there were presentations, I'm sure there's going to be a separate section that says presentations.
Sorry, what should have been in? I didn't follow you.
So which meeting are you in?
Well, you said in October 5th, something should have been at B1.
So if you look at the October 5th meeting, and we have A5, that could have easily been a B1. If I had caught that in our agenda planning meeting or with the draft agenda, I would have had that be B1 and had.
Sorry, that's a presentation. It's not a voting item. The B personnel instructional items are action items. They're voting.
No, so what I'm saying, okay, so maybe it's easier if you look at agenda September 21st. In September 21st, opening items was A, B was presentations and reports. So what I'm saying is, in the October meeting, A5 could have been a B1 and it could have been presentations, reports. Then the voting items could have started on C as opposed to B in that particular meeting.
I was like, okay, so this is also a work session versus a regular meeting. So things are ordered a little differently.
Yeah, and that's the next can of worms, by the way, is work session versus regular meetings, because that's another place where we sometimes are a little inconsistent. The other thing to bear in mind, the other logical reason for considering breaking up the public comment sessions is to try to get through the agenda related items so that we go into exec session and then come out of exec session, vote on the agenda, and all of those important decisions that really require a full attention span to, and all that is happening before 11 p.m. Because I have noticed, personally speaking, I'll speak for myself, when it starts getting late, I don't want to make very important decisions when it's really late, because you get a little loopy, right? The thought processes are not firing, or the engine is not firing on all cylinders at that point, right? So I would love if we could have a way to try to, increase the chances that those important decision points and all that's happening at an earlier point in time in the day. That way we're all wide awake and making the best decisions, the best, most sound decisions that we can as possible. So that's the other reason for that debate that's come up in the past about splitting the comments. That way, we get through the bulk of the agenda, the work, and then come back out and, be available to the public for anything they want to talk about beyond the agenda items. So that's the other thing, just putting it out there. That's the other reason we've talked about that in the past, was to try to make sure that we try to get the decisions made at an earlier point in time during the day. It's also so that we're cognizant of the fact that our community members have full-time jobs, they have their own lives going on, they have children in the district. staying up late at night to watch us make decisions at 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, it may be feasible for some. But I strongly suspect that we do lose a lot of our viewers, probably as the hours get later, right? It gets pretty exhausting. So those are some of the reasons we've talked about it in the past, of trying to get that portion of the meeting, and by virtue of the split public comment sessions, trying to get that done earlier so that we reach a broader audience. But it sounds like we're kind of in the middle. We're not 100% either way. It sounds like there is potentially an appetite to split the public comments. Well, let's start with that. Are we in alignment to split the public comments or not? I see Tracy.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Iverson, your thoughts?
I'm just kind of still torn about that. I mean, 4 minutes is split. I don't know how we're going to regulate the 2 minutes, but yeah, I think we try it. I think I'm open. Let's try it and see how it goes and start with that.
Okay.
Is your issue more with, sorry. I was trying to get clarity on if the issue, Dr. Iverson, you have is with the amount of minutes, like the 4 minutes as too much, or is your issue with the 2 minute and 2 minute?
No, the 4 minutes is fine. I mean, the 4 minutes can end up being 15 minutes. If even when we divide it and public comment is stated and we say even get into responding, which, so I just probably prefer the 4 minutes. They sign up and we maybe move that section. So maybe as Trustee Ballin said, it is after presentation. So for the 4 minutes that on that agenda, when we're having public comment, is either items on the agenda that people have signed up to talk about, or whatever's on their heart. If you want to open it up that you haven't signed up, but you want to make a comment, you can, but it's 4 minutes and it's on a section of the agenda, and we do that. And when that's done, that's the public comment section. It's done. I like it better probably together. So it's regular, it's consistent, and people can depend on when it's going to be on the agenda. Maybe the discussion is just moving it where it's better suited to take in the different types of comments people, public may want to have, but it's one section on the agenda consistently, so we can depend on that.
Okay. Trustee Ballin?
I agree with what Dr. Iverson said. I think if we split it and we try to police what is said in those 2 minutes, it's not going to happen. I think if we split it and people have 4 minutes of speaking on an agenda topic, they're going to be upset. I agree with everything Dr. Iverson said. I think we keep the 4 minutes together. We move where it is in the meeting. So I think we need to break down work sessions, regular meetings, special meetings.
Yeah.
How we plot out our time.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're not splitting, so that's fine. So we'll leave the public comment section as a 4 minute. So we're here 4 minutes contiguous. I misspelled that, of course. Contiguous. Thank you. Now let's talk about structure and where we put those public comments, right? Let's keep in mind that we're trying to move through the agenda and make sure that we're making those decisions at a reasonable hour. Any suggestions for where those public comment section should go?
Can I start with special? I'd like to just have on our policy breakdown into sections. So for special meetings, no public comments will be heard unless publicized beforehand. Because again, if we have a special meeting and we say that no public comments are heard, and then someone shows up and we let them speak, everyone who didn't bother to go to the meeting and just plan to watch it, they're upset, because if they had known public comments would be allowed, they would have gone to the meeting and made their public comments. So no public comments at special meetings unless publicized beforehand, is my suggestion.
I don't know if we should do that. I know in the past it was no public comments at special meetings with exception. I think the board president can make that exception. The only reason why I don't want it so rigid is what if there's a situation? I can't necessarily think of one right off the top of my head, but what if there's a situation where the board, not just one person, but the board wants to deviate from that, and now we put that in there? I don't know.
My thought process is, we know, generally speaking, what the special meeting is about. If a special meeting is pertaining to the budget or something specific, we know we'll most likely want public comment at that meeting. Most other special meetings, again, we generally know what's going to happen at that meeting. There wouldn't be surprises where we would off the cuff want public comment, but maybe I have been on the board for just a few months. You guys might have other scenarios that have arisen in the
I
past.
can't think of one off the top of my head. I just know that, this district, strange things happen. And some of those things are in there for a reason. And it might be that they've run into a situation where they've had to make a decision at that time and make an exemption. Do we want to say with, consultant of the full board as opposed to just the board president making that decision if the full board decides to open it up? Would that? Mm-hmm.
Then for me, it goes back to the problem of, if people presumed because of the protocol that no comments would be allowed, and therefore they did not attend the meeting, then they're prejudiced before they're prejudiced against it by not showing up and us making that off the cuff change in protocol.
Yeah, I will say I would not be in favor of a lack of consistency, right? So either we're going to say we allow it or we don't, in my mind. And in my mind, just thinking through all the special meetings I've been in the few years I've been on the board, I can't think of a specific instance where we would not have gone much longer in our meeting if we would have added public comments to a special meeting. I think that those special meetings really are focused on one particular subject at the time, right? Or to address something that has to be approved in an urgent manner. And I think we also have to weigh the fact that special meetings happen in addition to the existing meetings. So there's already the time commitment that's being spent from the board and the superintendent's perspective on attending the regular meetings, the board meetings, committee meetings, and then we're going to go and add another special meeting on top. And then now we want to go and ask for public comment at the special meeting as well. I worry that we might be overextending ourselves a little there. That's just my initial thought on that. Dr. Iverson, do you have any thoughts?
Special meetings are, as you both described, for one, and they're those meetings you need to have for reasons of emergency or need a quick decision from the board. And so it is limited to just that item, and it is public for the board to do their business and get in and get out. So I'm not used to public comment being at special meetings. So I would lean to that. I think the public comments are really at the work session, because that's the work where we're presenting the new information, and that's where we should have comment there. The regular meeting where we're voting on what we discussed the week before, I don't see public comment being there, because at that point all the discussion was discussed. At the work session, we had public comment, so I would put it at the work session. And that's the only meeting where I think public comment should be, because the regular meeting, again, I think is where we vote on what we discussed the week before. So all the discussion has happened. And the special meeting is just about the item that the board needs to discuss quickly, vote on, and end the meeting. So that's my take. I think only at the work session.
Thank you, Dr. Iverson. Trustees Valen, Trustee Mayers, any thoughts?
Well, it's hard for me because I'm of the meetings of the old pre-COVID, right? And pre-COVID, as Trustee Valen will recall, our work sessions were in the mansion. They were not filmed or taped. They were really work. They were, we dressed down. It's not, professional dress per se. We could wear jeans. We also had food and we would all have dinner together while working through the agendas. And there were public comments at work sessions, but usually those were comments that people didn't necessarily want taped. Maybe they wanted to address the board about something that maybe would make them uncomfortable. They didn't want it filmed and played on public access so much. Our notes and the minutes were public, but it wasn't filmed and it wasn't taped in that way. So we actually did not do presentations at work sessions. We did have the type of presentations we would have at work sessions were things like if we were, I don't know, interviewing a new law firm. So we did that at the work session where the law firms came in and they gave their little spiel to us at the work session. The actual big presentations that we're doing, with technology, we had people personnel, we're going to have the school, each individual school. Those were always big regular meetings. Those were taped. Those were at, either at the high school location or in the individual school locations. And so we had public comment in both places. It wasn't just the work session or just the regular meeting. But Ivy informs me that previously, even before all of this, because she's been here about 17 years, years ago, maybe 10 years, maybe longer, the board never had public comments at their regular meeting, just like Dr. Iverson is describing. The regular meeting used to start 8:00, and that was their start time. And at some point, the board decided to add an extra hour in the beginning so that they could get certain open items done in an exec session, because the exec session never happened. So we can go either way. It depends on how, this committee feels, and then make a recommendation to the full board. I'm fine with trying whatever way works and is more efficient. But my mind goes to public comments both places, because that's how I was kind of raised here, right? My experience here has been that it's been in both places.
Thank you, Trustee Valen.
Well, first a question. So we're going to do all of our presentations at the work sessions, is what I'm hearing. Is that what we've decided for this year?
Well, these would be recommendations to the board, right? We haven't decided anything, because if the board as a whole, if the board decides, we don't want to do that, it's a moot point. But it sounds like part of the recommendation would be to do the presentations at the work session, and also have the student non-voting board member at the work session to provide their input and tell us how these things that we're talking about will affect them, right? As well as, just get us through that process, right? To try to make us more efficient. That's what it sounds like to me.
I guess I'm trying to juggle in my mind. So I'm combining a couple things. I'm juggling in my mind how long the work session is, because it also tends to have a longer exec session, because we're going into the details of everything that we'll vote on in 2 weeks. And then we're adding on top of that presentations and public comments. That the work session sounds like it's going to be a very long meeting, and the regular meeting is shrinking considerably. I'm just wondering, to balance those out, I guess I'm toying with, why do we not consider doing the presentations at the regular meeting? The student would attend the regular meeting, but then they're not. Sorry, I'm juggling through this.
So are we using regular meetings synonymous with the voting meeting? Is the regular meeting the meeting you vote?
Yes.
Or what you discussed at the work session?
Yes.
So if we have discussion at the regular meeting, are we opening, we're voting. You're having you're having presentations there at the regular meeting. It's sort of after the fact, because the decision around whatever is presented, it could be a proposal, it could be a presentation.
The presentations referring to are the school presentations,
Right.
the
Mhm.
board president's report, the superintendent's report, the presentations that aren't necessarily voting items, not,
So the board
But they
president
still are,
report,
it
the
still
board,
is content for discussion. Whether it's a voting item or not, it's the content around the work that the board listens to, hears presented, either around initiatives. It's still all content. And so, and then there are things that will roll over next week that will show up where the board then decides, yay, nay, we are going to say support the initiative, not. So if we have presentations at the voting meeting, then you got to open it up for discussion again. And you have to, board should have an opportunity to ask questions about the presentations. We're kind of doing a little both at both. We're doing a little work session work
yeah.
again at the regular meeting.
And traditionally, the work session is supposed to, the agenda is really not supposed to change that much, but it changes drastically. And part of the problem, I guess, or issue that this happens is our meetings for, structure's sake and for preparedness sake. At some point in the past, the district decided to have their meetings every 2 weeks apart. So in those 2 weeks, we can have a lot of hires, we could have resignations, whatever, what have you. Other districts, if you look at their schedule, it's not quite the same. So they may have a Tuesday meeting, they may have a Friday night meeting, and within the same week, they may do the work session. So if we did a work session on Tuesday and Friday had a regular meeting, our agendas may not change actually. But we don't do it that way. We have a 2-week break gap. So yeah, all things kind of come into both meetings. We haven't, at least not since I've been here, been able to not get new things pop up on the regular meeting agenda. So I don't know if there's a way to do that with that space in between meetings.
And Trustee Maris, technically, you're right. That should not, what we discussed at the work session, the new hires, the new position, all of that work, once we get to the voting meeting, you're right, we shouldn't have new things added. We have done it in our haste to get people hired, and because of the need to get these classes covered. Technically, we really shouldn't. We don't have to be that rigid, but the process at the regular meeting, those meetings should go within an hour and a half, because it's just the board voting on all that discussion. So you're right, Trustee Valen. The work session is given. It's a longer meeting. And if you're going to have exec session, that's where that's handled as well. I'm used to exec session being sometimes the hour before the meeting. Still the meeting is advertised, but the board has from 6 to 7 time to have the exec session. So the regular work session starts at 7, and you've done that work around the executive work. And then you get into the work session agenda, and you just go through the items and have that open discussion and leave that meeting with where your decisions around what will remain for voting the next meeting. So when we get to regular meeting, the discussion has been finished. It's been had. And we're just going through saying yes or no. The board then decides how you want to vote. It's all kinds of variations of it, but I'm hearing we have exec session at both meetings. We could also, Trustee Maris, just make sure all we're going to discuss in exec session happens at one meeting, and anything else rolls over the next month to the next meeting. But we have both, because between the 2 weeks, as you said, things come up and we're discussing it.
I guess hearing all of that, until we have a good track record of our agendas not changing much between work session and regular meeting, I probably am going to go with Tracy. I probably think we need to keep public comments at both meetings.
Okay.
Just because so much can change between the two. Once we get that solidified, then I think we can really address it and maybe just limit public comments to the work sessions.
Okay, good point.
I think it's a really good goal, and I would love to get there, that happens. It hasn't happened since I've been here. It's always, and it's probably that amount of time. I mean, 2 weeks is a long time within a month. It's half of the month when you're dealing with all the personnel and all the students and all the
Right.
programming. But I would love to try to get there where there's maybe even only one item or something added. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
I don't know if we're done with this particular issue, but I know there were a couple of other things with regard to public comments I wanted to quickly bring up. So I don't know where to put it, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
So sorry. So if we've agreed, we're taking a long way to get to the same where we are right now. So do we need to look at where the public comments are in the work session and the regular meeting?
We do. Yep.
Just to encompass everything we've discussed.
And because we talked about the placement of the public comment with regard to the reports and presentations, I did ask Ivy very quickly, and she got back to me and said, whatever the board wants with regard to placement and location, she can do. So we're not going to be restricted by that, which is good.
Okay.
Okay, so where do we want the public comments during the work session?
So let's pull up a work session. So
Go ahead, Trustee Valen.
So I will advocate the last of the opening items because then it's after the presentations. Oh, wait, we have exec session in there. Oh, we've had different formats.
So you mean the last before so the last will say adjourn to exec session. So you mean whatever the item is right before that, you want to say public
Correct.
comment?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that, I think.
What happens when we have a section like in the September, I have to go back to that meeting, September 14th meeting, 21st meeting. What happens when we have an actual section that says presentation and reports?
Hold on,
You want
that's
the
a- Before- So that's a regular meeting.
But that doesn't matter because we're going to do presentation and reports in the work sessions as well. So that section is going to end up in a work session.
So let's take them one at a time. So on the work session side, it sounds like we're saying we want to do public comments right before we adjourn to executive session. Are we all on the same page there?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the order would go, call meeting to order, pledge of allegiance, policy reviews, presentations, committee reports, board, superintendent, all the reports, public comments, then adjourn. Right?
Yeah. It's
Just
like
break-
we're at the end of the meeting almost, before
Okay,
we go to exec session. Mhm.
okay.
Okay, so we're fine there. And then during the regular meeting,
Probably before the vote. Go ahead.
Before the voting.
Yeah, I was gonna say before the voting, because that meeting we're voting, so it's last minute, any comments from the public that they have an opportunity to voice before the board votes.
So do we still publicize that the presentations will begin at 8 p.m.? Normally we put that the statements from the public will begin at 8 p.m. Do we publicize that whatever is in that presentation and report section will begin at 8?
Yeah, we usually always do it before. I'm trying to think of when we do tenures and we have I'm thinking pre-COVID, we had tenures and we do Nettie Jackson Extra Mile Award, all of that stuff. Let me look back. Is all that stuff before or after public comment?
Let me find it. Let's see. We did it in the work session on September 14th. We did that after exec and before public comment.
So if you look back to June 22nd, where we did the Extra Mile Award, Nettie Jackson Extra Mile Award, those are recognitions. So we could have very easily had awards or reports, but we do recognition in the opening items. And this is a work session. Oh, you want a regular meeting? Okay.
Yeah, right. When did we do it?
Special meeting. We had a bunch of special meetings, dear God.
Because sometimes those recognitions could be students.
That's true. That's true.
It looks like regular meetings are always, I think, you know, Chris, you're referencing the October work session. I think that actually was an anomaly. And I think the reason why is because the personnel, people personnel person was leaving. I think if we tried to wait to the next meeting, I think she would have been gone. I think that's why that presentation had to go right before they were leaving.
That was correct. That was correct. Mm-hmm.
But normally that would have been in a different area, it looks like.
So I'm just going to go back to like 2018 and see what happened.
That's a good idea.
For COVID. So for example, June 19, we did the pledge, Nettie Jackson, retiree recognition, statements from the public, superintendent. We did exec first at 7.
Right, that's a regular meeting.
We convened at 8 o'clock, pledge, recognitions, public reports, and then voting is what we did.
Okay, so we're all on the same page that for regular meeting, we'll do it immediately prior to the board vote.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right.
It'll be the last item before.
Yep. All right, so that's taken care of. We're just keeping the 4 minutes contiguous block. Responses. I think the reason we have this here is just so that, again, just so we can establish some consistency, not necessarily with our board, but future boards to come, so that the public has a standard expectation. And in my mind, the process we're following now makes sense, which is, you know, the administration, if there is a response ready to go ahead and give it. Otherwise, we take the feedback and the administration replies when appropriate. I think that's the best way to go, in my opinion. Anybody have any thoughts around that, or are we all on the same page there?
And we are getting responses to those that we need to research the very next day.
Okay.
Yes.
So do we want to lock you into that you're replying the next day?
I would say, I think it's reasonable to expect that we get back to them within 24 to 48 hours. I mean, maybe, but we certainly don't wait. We get on it the very next day and we make sure we send something back. So reasonably 24 to 48 hours is very fair, I think, to expect us to get back to the public with questions and comments and feedback that we don't have an answer to, that like a short yes or no right on the spot.
Okay, Trustee Valen, I see you. It looks like you want to say something.
I'd like to say 48 hours because you never know what you have scheduled the next day.
Yes.
Way there.
Yes.
Okay, so we will memorialize that. So it's going to be instant response if possible, otherwise 48 hours.
If it requires more research.
Okay.
Yeah, within, can we say within 48 hours?
Yeah.
Sure.
That way, because it looks like you've been hitting 24 even, but
Yeah.
I like giving you a little bit more leeway.
And I like Trustee Valen saying 48 too. So if we can get it done within 24, we do it. But no later than 2 days. Yes.
Right.
Perfect. All right, so we're good there. All right, I think we hit pretty much all of the bullet points here. The only thing,
More.
okay, I see there's a few more. Just the one that comes to my mind, Trustee Valen had just mentioned it a few minutes ago, was the actual time for the public comments, right? Do we want to actually say a time? Because I know that that's also become an issue in the past where sometimes, you know, exec session has well, we're doing it prior to exec session, so that won't kick in as much. So I think we'll be fine there. But there are times when we have presentations or something that may go on a little longer. And then we have the public kind of sitting there waiting to say something. And, we don't want to cut off the presentation either. I guess I'm wondering if we should specify a time or if we should just leave it the way it is now, but it does leave a little bit of ambiguity. I see Trustee Valen.
So the regular meetings, it sounds like we'll still be doing exec session first. So for the regular meetings, I think we do need to specify on or about 8 p.m., whatever. I mean, we've been doing a good job recently because we've had many things to discuss in exec of breaking exec into two parts, which is not ideal, but at least we're meeting the demands of the public.
I would support that idea of 8 p.m.
I want us to be very careful, though. I think what we should do is be clear that at 8 p.m. will be presentations, reports, and public comments. I don't necessarily want to lock us into just giving a time for public comments. I mean, every training I'm going to is reminding me that, the meeting isn't for public comments. So I just think we have to be careful with giving an exact time because sometimes things do happen as well. But giving a general grouping of, reports, presentations, and public comments will begin at 8 p.m. That way it may be 8, it may be 8:30, but it's happening around that time. It's going to be slightly ambiguous.
So maybe we rename it estimated time to reconvene in open session. Estimated. And do we want to build in another half hour of exec and just change it to 8:30? No, that's too late. Since theoretically the regular meeting, it's just once we're out and open, it's very few presentations and voting. Uh, 8 p.m.
Something along those lines, estimated time to commence public comments, 8 p.m.
No, not public comments, open session, because the presentations before public comments.
All right. No feedback will to me mean that we're in alignment and we'll move forward.
So funny. I'm like looking at this email that I never sent you in reply to the agenda where I wanted you to put these things on there. So I do have another question. Don't forget about me about public comments.
Okay. Okay. Let me just scroll down here. Board evaluation. Okay, yeah, let's keep going with this conversation because the next piece is a board evaluation conversation. All right. Any volunteer to go first?
I'll go first. So written submission, because I'm going to forget. I'm glad I thought I sent the email. I'm so sorry, but written submission. So I did get a written submission in September, I think it was, or maybe August. And I know we faced those before and they weren't read, but some districts do read them. So, it'd be interesting for us to make a recommendation and then have that very clear that we do or we don't read. Not just, we can always take written communication to the board, but do we read written statements from the community at our board meetings?
Are you recommending that we present that to the board or are you wanting a discussion now?
Yeah, so anything that the committee is discussing has to be fully decided on and then recommended to the board. And then the board can decide whether they want to approve it, modify it. A lot of times that will be the trigger to start the discussion at the board level as well. So what we would like to do here is let's establish what as a committee we are aligned on, and then we would send that to the board and ask for their input. So in my opinion, regarding written statements, I don't know, I'm kind of torn there. On one side of me, one side of my thought process is I like the fact that the public has the ability to send us a written statement and that we'll read it. But by that same virtue, I feel that the point behind public comments and the reason we ask our community to sign up for it and to come up and speak about it is because I think it's helpful, at least in my mind, to hear directly, from the community and to hear, there's things that get written on paper, the intonation, sentiments, expressions, they don't translate necessarily. I could read a line of text right now and think it's, it seems aggressive when there was no aggressiveness at all, or the other way around. I mean, I personally, I would much rather have the public, present it themselves, right? So that they who knows better than that individual how they want to convey their message. So that's my personal, I think that's my personal opinion, if you ask me.
I agree. I mean, if I have a vote there, I do agree. That's better. Understanding some people just can't get there. But I think we have to establish a approach to this. And I think, your comment is worth being heard by the board when you present it to the board. And I don't know how you control written statements. I mean, you could get 10 of them. How do we control for that? We don't want it to become that way, that be the way we start having public comment, if that we open it up to that. As we need, I think the consistency piece, again, is public comments are made public by the public. So I think that's in public.
I need to apologize to you all. I actually had Ivy poll our local school districts, and she is in a group email with all the Westchester clerks, and she asked them, I had her ask, and this is back in October 7th when we were talking about this meeting, I had her actually ask districts clerks, do you take public comments at regular and work sessions or both? At what point do you take public comments? So the same things we're discussing now. What is your process for allowing student or minor speakers? What is your process for written statements submitted for a reading at a meeting? And how many minutes are allotted for your public comments? And so even though we're making a decision for Greenburgh, I do want you guys to see that. And so I do need to apologize for not sending that ahead of time. I'm sorry.
No worries. So maybe what we could do is once we finalize what our recommendation is here as a committee, maybe we could send that data along with Ivy's analysis to the whole board, right? And we'll all see it again and we'll have an opportunity to look at it and think about it. And whatever we decide on today, this is, our recommendation today. It's not to say we can't change our recommendation in the future. We've done that plenty of times in other committees. But I think that the work we're doing here right now is worthwhile, and it's heading us in the right direction to be more efficient. So I would recommend we keep going with it, and then we put together the recommendation, and then we package all the data. And then when we get to the board conversation, if we feel that we want to significantly shift anything here, we can go ahead and do so at that time. That's my take.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't send it to you guys ahead of time.
No worries.
My two cents are that that we continue as is without including written comments for both of the reasons, the reasons that both you and Dr. Iverson have stated. I do want to stress for the public watching that when we receive written emails, 99.9% of the time, unless it somehow slips and accidentally gets deleted, the public is receiving a reply, and we are engaging in dialogue. So just because it's a comment in a meeting does not receive more weight than an email to the board. So I just want to make that clear. And saying that further goes to my point. I feel like the written statements, if it's an email trying to address a problem or point out something that the person would like us to consider, it is getting that consideration. I don't think having it read aloud in a meeting will make any difference as far as what we then do with it. That's all.
That's good feedback. So I think what it sounds like as a committee we're saying is, I'll put it succinctly, written statements will be accepted, if I could type, by the board, but not read aloud during meetings. And that still, to your point, Trustee Valen, gives us the opportunity to just formalize what we're doing already, right? We're going to read the statement ourselves. We're going to understand what we extract from it, which is part of why I said it's better when the public community member comes and tells it themselves. And then we'll try to interpret it as appropriate, but we won't go ahead and read that during the meeting. It'll just be something that the board receives it and takes into consideration. All right, perfect. Go ahead. I see your hand up.
If we're moving on, I do have another topic for public comments. If we're
Okay.
moving from this.
Let's go ahead.
Excuse me. Looking at the same paragraph where the 4 minutes are mentioned in our policy 1510, it says the Board of Education will not permit in public session comments involving individual district personnel or students. So I've been attending some training, and I had listened to a couple superintendents speak, and one of them, as well as board members from around Westchester Putnam area, and one of them, one comment really stuck with me, and that was that in one particular district, the superintendent pointed out that they allow no comments on employees, negative or positive, good or bad. And that way it was just a firm rule that they followed so that there would never be any problems on down the line. I know, let's ignore last year. In let's talk 5 years ago, we would often let people stand up and speak in glowing terms of people who are retiring or receiving tenure or whatever. This particular superintendent says they don't even allow that unless previously mentioned that only at this particular moment in the meeting for a tenure or a specific thing, if you wish to speak, you may. They made it very clear. You couldn't just show up and say how great your social studies teacher was. It was a very hard and fast rule that I think we need to consider, maybe mull over for a little bit, but I know we've had issues with this topic. And so I'm just going to put it on the plate.
Yeah, I'll give you my feedback. I think our issue really has come from inconsistency, right? And that's what we've talked about in the past. And inconsistency in my mind always leads to conflict, conflict and miscommunication, because it's easy to see how someone will feel slighted if, they feel like, this particular individual got their comments in, they wanted to talk about this, and I'm not allowed to raise an issue, right? So I can see the logic behind why that district would make that hard and fast rule. Just thinking about policing that and enforcing that, I know for us that's been a challenge in the past. Just wondering how we would go about doing so if we decided we wanted to go something along those lines, because it is a fact that, right, we should be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Iverson, any thoughts?
Yeah.
Your wisdom?
No, I'm thinking that hard and fast. I mean, it's staying consistent is again absolutely what we need to do. And if you have that hard and fast line about there's just no comment made either way, it just keeps you safe, and it keeps you out of that area where some people can feel slighted. Some people feeling left out, or it's just that imbalance happening. I just think that is consistent, just not doing it. But I think, again, like you said, Trustee Pineda, this is, again, something to think about and recommend to the board, but how you want to approach that it's always nice to hear accolades of staff at the meetings, but if you were not talking personnel in public, we're not talking personnel in public.
Trustee Mears, you're muted.
Sorry, I said yes. No, I'm in agreement. I said yes, whether it's good or bad.
Okay, so Trustee Valen, what's your position?
Neither good nor bad.
Okay, so we're in alignment then. All right,
Yeah.
so we will add that to our list here. So we're gonna say public comments can't reference positive or negative reflection on.
Individual district personnel or students. I think it's fair game to talk about departments or schools. I think that those are things that need to come to light. Sorry, I jumped in.
No, it's fine because it was in here at the same time, so that's fine. All right, everyone seems like we're in alignment there. Any more discussion on public comments or anything along those lines? Okay, that looks like we're good. So is the, we got one last one. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just thought of something.
I'm just skimming the virtual meeting section. I just want to give it a quick read to make sure we don't need to adjust anything there. I'm going to read it out loud if I may.
Absolutely.
Virtual meetings, when board meetings are held via Zoom or another online platform, requests must be submitted to the district clerk by email and no later than 24 hours prior to the meeting. This is when no public attendance is allowed, and currently public attendance is allowed at our board meetings. Requests to speak will be honored on a first come, first served basis. Speakers will be permitted to speak for no longer than 4 minutes, and the entirety of the public comment session will not exceed 1 hour. So that's an inconsistency between virtual and real and live. For online meetings, only registered speakers will be allowed into the session for the duration of their comments. All other rules apply to virtual meetings as are set forth in this policy.
Can I stop you about the inconsistency? I do think that not necessarily inconsistent. I think there needs to be a difference there because we had a huge uptick in participation when we became virtual. And if we have only, even pre-COVID, we only had 4 or 5 speakers max. And that was when it was like a really important topic or something that was going on the agenda. Virtually, I mean, we had an unlimited amount of people at times. So limiting it to 1 hour so that we could actually get work done, I thought was a wise decision at that time. And I'm going to kind of say, I think that's a wise decision now. We may end up there again. I don't know. But if we do, I think it's a great idea that you brought this up. So I'm very thankful that you're here and bringing this up because we should be planned ahead of time on how we're going to do that. You know, having the amount of people in the meeting or not, if just the speaker is let in or not, I think all of that. And I think, Ashley, we talked about this a little bit last year about how to make that much smoother. We were thrown into it, but planning ahead just in case we end up there, I think is a wise thing to do.
Dr. Iverson, any thoughts?
I'm just mulling over that right now. I don't know quite what my thoughts are right now, Trustee Pineda. I just think we need to think about that.
Okay.
Did you have board meetings virtually and where you came from, Dr.
Yeah,
Ives?
we did, and they could participate virtually, but they had to sign up ahead of time. And at the very end of the meeting, where they were only public comment was only at the voting session, the work session. And as we have now at the end of the meeting, right before, after the board did all this business, then the public could comment, and it was virtually, they had the link, they had to sign in, and we had none at the regular, so, for the voting. So,
Do you recall if everyone was let in or if only the speaker was let in at that time?
Only the speakers who signed up. You did this like in person, only those who signed up spoke.
So I'm not a tech person, but so Ashley, you'll know what I'm talking, the real
Yeah,
name.
yeah, I know where you're going with it.
You know where I'm going. Okay, so
No,
you address it. Yeah.
Let's just close this one out first, and then we'll go to that one.
Okay.
And I think Trustee Valen had one too. So this is why I said when I sent out the draft agenda, I fully expect we'll spend most of the day on this one policy for now, and we'll talk about the other ones in the future. But that's fine. This is a long time coming. This is great progress. My thoughts on the general time limit on the virtual meetings. I was present for when we came up with that rule, and I fully understand why we did it. And I think it really did become an issue where we were no longer being efficient in our meeting, and we were getting to the point where we were making decisions that were super late. And in my opinion, I'm of the opinion that making decisions super late is not going to benefit the children at the end of the day, because we may make a decision that may not be as great as it could have been. So I would definitely say I would view this similar to Trustee Mayer's, in that it's not necessarily an inconsistency, it's an adjustment based on the fact that it's a different platform and it's a different mechanism for delivery. And we definitely, that's one of the things I will say I miss about the virtual board meetings. Our participation rate went through the roof. We had folks, parents that have children. I mean, it was very easy for them to get on and participate, at least view the meeting live and et cetera. So yeah, I would like us to keep the virtual meeting being called out a little differently, as well as the 1 hour time limit there, from my perspective. Okay, are we in alignment there, leaving that as is?
I think so.
Well, the only question I have is, since we're changing to have the public comments after presentations, and if people need to sign up 24 hours beforehand, it sounds like we just maintain the status quo, and new people won't be able to inquire on those presentations if we move back to this virtual world.
Got it. So I guess in my mind, there's something, and maybe we should put it in writing so that it's formalized. But just because a question was not inquired about during public comment doesn't mean the question can't be sent after the meeting in another mechanism, right? So I would suggest, I think we not maybe focus so much on that piece of it, and maybe we just add it to just making it very transparent, saying, hey, if there's, because if anybody has a concern and it didn't come up in public comment, it doesn't stop anyone from reaching out to the district and saying, hey, I have a question. I mean, that's an option too. I think maybe that's the better route, so that we don't get it all the way into the minutia of that specific thing.
So are you suggesting we amend the policy to say the public can make inquiries on presentations via email to board@greenburghcsd.org, or just not mention it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if we need to say it. It's just, I'm just curious. I'm trying to think it through, right? I know personally that if I read something and it's really, really, really long, I get to a point where I start kind of, spacing out a little bit, and I might miss an important item at the very bottom of it. So I'm wondering if we even need to say it, but maybe it would just be, maybe we can reference it somewhere, to your point, Trustee Valen, just at the bottom of our policy saying, hey, if there's any questions or concerns that come up outside of a meeting, please feel free to reach out to, and then we can put in the email address, and that's a conduit as well.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're good there. Anyone else before we go to what Trustee Maris was referencing?
So I was referencing student participation. Although it's in agenda, it's in policy. I'm tired now. It's in policy number 8430 or 8340, 3480. I don't know what the number is.
3240.
There you go, 3240. Although it's in there, do we want to make a recommendation about having students speak at our board meetings or not? Or not? Maybe we don't want to but those were the things, the written and the students were the things that came up actually within the last few meetings. So I'm wondering if we want to specify that.
So my gut reaction to that is, I don't think it would hurt to put it in there, but at the same time, we're already talking about adding in a student non-voting board member, right? That theoretically a lot of that feedback would come through that conduit. But that doesn't preclude anyone, right, from signing up for public comment and speaking their mind, including our students. So I don't know if we need to get into that level of, as I'm thinking it through, I don't know if we need to get into that level of detail, because we already have we're going to hopefully have, depending if the public approves it, the non-voting student board member that can provide that input directly to the board. Yeah, I don't know if we need to get into that level of minutia. That's my initial thought. Anyone else?
I kind of agree, because I've seen this role before. That student voice somehow was able to get and have some knowledge of what the student body maybe felt about a particular issue to represent them as the voice at the board meeting. So I think a lot of it will come through that vehicle if this is approved. I mean, I do agree with students having voice at the board meeting. They come prepared. They come usually with their script, and they express their heart there. I think we wait and see, as Trustee Beneda said, and see how it comes through this representative. But they're public. They have the voice as well. They're part of the public, and I think they shouldn't be prohibited from speaking at the board meetings.
And thank you, Dr. Anderson. And Trustee Mayor, just to clarify, you did say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I heard you say that Ivy put in a cross-reference to the.
She did.
So we're already covered this. So if a student ever, I guess if I was a student, I one day decided, you know what, I want to know if I can go talk at a board meeting, they could see the bottom reference to their policy and then go and check that and see that there's no issue with that.
Yes.
I think Trustee Valens' hand is up.
So 2 points. I mean, students are public, and when we're talking about public participation at meetings, they're covered, it refers to speakers, persons, so they're included in that broad category. With regard to the cross-referenced policy, we actually do need to put that on the next agenda for review, because it does need to be amended regarding the written parental approval portion. So we'll put it on the agenda and then farm it out to legal and admin.
You're speaking specifically, just to clarify, specifically needs to be approved for the reference part you're talking about, right?
Needs to be approved for the reference.
No, for the written. It says in our policy that they need written parent permission. Carol, our attorney, said that she's going to check, but she wasn't certain that even written permission is needed. So we need to clarify that for sure for review and with legal.
Okay.
And maybe Greenburgh board wants to specify students younger than X grade or X age should be accompanied by parents or something like that. So I think this is one we need to take a closer look at in the future and refer it to the appropriate chain.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we can leave that one off for now. And then let's go to what Trustee Maris had raised. So the point that Trustee Maris was raising is, let me give a little context. When we were having those virtual meetings, the way we were doing them is we were holding them via Zoom, the same way we're having a Zoom meeting today. And the Board of Education, the superintendent, whoever from the administration side was attending the meeting was in the Zoom meeting. And then when it came time for public comments, we would invite the individuals that had signed up for public comments to the waiting room for the Zoom room meeting. And then what we would do is when it was their turn, we would let them into the Zoom meeting. They would do their public comment, and then we would remove them put them back in the waiting room. And that basically effectively removed them from the meeting. And everyone else was watching the meeting live streamed via the YouTube channel. Now that worked okay, but depending on what was going on, sometimes there were circumstances where folks weren't in the waiting room where they were supposed to be in the waiting room, or something happened along those lines, and we had to jumble around the order a few times. But additionally, what ended up happening is we started getting the YouTube channel, the stream, started having its own thread of comments and all that coming in. There were a few meetings where there was some cross-pollination between what was going on in the YouTube stream and comments that were being made there being essentially read at the Zoom meeting, and it became a little bit messy. There are some other districts that have taken a different approach. Some districts have chosen to use a Zoom webinar functionality. And with Zoom webinar, what ends up happening is you have your panelists or your participants, as whatever words you want to use interchangeably. And those folks, as we are right now, would be live on streaming and having the conversations, having the dialogues. That whole meeting is happening. And then the public can directly join the webinar, but none of them are actually directly interacting with us. They're kind of just viewing the stream as it happens live on the Zoom side. I know in the past when we raised this with the technology department, they clarified that our current licensing model that we have purchased with Zoom does not include Zoom and webinars, which is why we've been going this route. That's one reason for it. And the other reason we've gone this route as well is because the YouTube channel becomes a permanent record that is easily accessible for any of our community. Just look up the Greenburgh CSD YouTube channel and you can see all the videos and recordings we've had without having to necessarily go look on the Zoom side or whatever comes along with viewing webinars. We could theoretically record the webinar on the Zoom side and then go and park it on the YouTube stream as well on the channel. Some companies do that, some organizations do that. But it was, I think the conversation has come up a few times just because we've just been trying to figure out, hey, if we ended up in that virtual mode again, how would we most effectively, have less confusion happen? Because then there's some confusion where folks are on the YouTube and the stream's a little delayed, a few seconds while the recording happens, and then the meeting's happening real time. And then the other thing that happened was we would have people that were going to do public comments leave their computer running with the YouTube stream with their volume up, then join our Zoom meeting into the waiting room. And then we would end up with this delayed echo effect. And everyone would get confused as to, okay, which conversation am I having? Is it the delayed? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. And then there would be like a 3-second delay, and it just turned into massive confusion. So Dr. Iverson, that's the context for why Trustee Mears is raising it, just as a, hey, what should we do moving forward? Trustee Mears, anything you want to add to that? Did I capture it?
You captured it. I just don't want to make this on the fly. If, I get a call from Dr. Iverson that says, okay, we just got word from the state, everything has to go virtual. I don't want us to have to rush and make a decision. I kind of want a plan in place ahead of time. So that's all.
I have a question, and maybe it's more for Laser. Who does the transcription service? Is it Zoom or YouTube that is doing the transcribing?
So I can actually let Laser cover. He has better information than I do.
It's a combination of both. Ivy does send it out for transcription, but YouTube also does it. We kind of rely on both, but officially she does it for the records. But YouTube does have a built-in translation.
Does that only happen when we're live streaming instead of recording a Zoom webinar and then posting it? Sorry, Ashley, I'm just trying to merge.
Sure. So just clarification. Today, we only do Zoom meetings. We don't have Zoom webinar because we don't have the license for it. So that's one piece. But then the second clarification piece is Ivy does the transcription piece that she sends out to that firm to have them do as accurate a job as possible for board meetings, not for committee meetings. So for example, tonight's committee meeting, it's either happening through Zoom's built-in software or through the YouTube transcription. That's not going to get sent out. And we did that from a cost perspective, right? Because we have so many committee meetings. Why waste taxpayer money on that when we can save it for the more important meetings. And it's costly to do transcription services.
Well, just in case that were a determining factor as far as the solution for all virtual too. I mean, we'd have to bear in mind whatever service.
So Laser, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that when we buy the Zoom licensing, Zoom automatically includes their basic level transcription services, right? It's not
Correct.
as accurate as what Ivy gets submitted because that's an actual human listening and properly adjusting for what the algorithms and the computers out there are interpreting and not necessarily getting the whole thing. But it is included as part of our license. And I presume Laser probably applies on the YouTube side too, right? Whatever we're doing there is probably covered already.
Yeah, it's the same basic computer translation. What gets sent out is, it's an actual human sitting for however long the meeting is. I think that's why it takes some time to get it back. But they're actually getting what's actually being said in the meetings. YouTube, if you look at some of the transcription, messes up some of the words and the context of some of the things being said. So yes.
Thank you, Laser. Any further questions on that?
No,
Okay.
I'm just fondly recalling my days on the other side of that problem.
All right, so it sounds like, so we gave Dr. Iverson some context. She understands the challenges we experienced in the past with virtual meetings and the benefits, again, increased participation, that was great. So something I guess mull over and maybe we can consider for the next committee meeting, just your thoughts.
Now, that was good context. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So with that said, I think we're at the end of the public comments discussion. So we can close that. Are we all in agreement that we can make this as a recommendation to the BOE?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that'll be the next step, is to extrapolate this from our agenda, which will become the minutes, and send that over to the Board of Education for consideration. The easiest way that we've done this in the past, that we ensure that everyone sees it, is to put it into the packet, because we know that everyone is checking the packets. Sometimes when we send it with email, there's so much email that goes back and forth, sometimes things can get lost. So we can extrapolate this, put it into the packet as part of the recommendation, and the board can evaluate it, and we can talk about it at the board level at a future meeting. All right, that said, it is 8:31.
Yeah.
We have been going at it for 2.5 hours. And while I love the productivity we've gotten in today and we've gotten a lot covered, I am also cognizant of the fact that not only us, but also our community has probably been watching meetings since Monday. And there's another meeting tomorrow. So I think, and Dr. Iverson's been up with us this whole time, pushing through. Thank you, Dr. Iverson. So I think it would be a good place to stop the meeting here. All of these policies that we have listed here, we can resume during our next meeting. I think what will probably happen is we'll probably start looking at these policies and earmarking, okay, do we want to look at all of them? Do we want to look at a subset? Have that whole conversation, figure out what we want to do there. And then after that, the step would be to follow what Dr. Iverson had wisely mentioned, which is let's get the latest update from NISBA, Eries 1 BOCES, get it to go through the process, then eventually it will come back to us. So I think that's what it sounds like our future steps are at a high level. And then the last thing, I did not forget, Trustee Maris, mid-year board evaluation. Given the time, 8:33, are you okay with us putting that into the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so we will earmark that for the next meeting. Let me just put a little comment here. To be discussed at next committee meeting. It's getting late. All right. That said, I want to thank everyone for their time. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So move. Second.
All those in favor? Aye. So we are going to adjourn at 8:33 p.m. Thank you, committee members, for your valuable input, your feedback, and look how much we already got done in a matter of 2 hours and 34 minutes. Everyone at home, have a great night, and we will see most of you again tomorrow. Next meeting.
I'll be watching. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Thank you,
Yep.
Laser.